second topic, the call for true federalism. So despite being constitutionally defined as the Federal Republic of Nigeria,
yes,
many scholars, and legal experts, argue that Nigeria operates more like a unitary state with excessive concentration of powers and resources at the center as the federal government. So what do you have to say about it?
Yes, I agree with those that have called consistently for proper restructuring of this nation and that we return to true federalism. Because what Nigeria has been witnessing over the years is more akin to unitary system of government. And we know that Nigeria had an unfair share of years of military dictatorship. And we know that under the military leadership, they command this unitary. The commander-in-chief of the country issues directives, orders, decrees, to the military administrators at the state level, and they do not question anything. They comply. So that unitary trait has been retained over time, because in Nigeria, after our independence, we now took up federal system of government, patterned after the American system. And in America, there is no over-concentration of power at the center. What obtains in America and other countries that operate the federal system is that at the center, there is power, but it's limited power. Power that covers areas like currency, immigration, and, the army, and so on. But then, the states have their resources, they control their resources, and they make contributions to sustain the federal government. And the President of America does not have exercise absolute powers, either at the center or in any form. Is guided by the Constitution of America. So the states, they are united and they cooperate, but they are independent. You develop at your pace. You don't compel any state to catch up with state B or state C. No. State A, you are in your domain, the resources, your area, you harness, you control, and then a percentage goes to the federal government. And that is likened to what operated under regional administration in the country. The regions were there under one federal government. The regions were developing at their paces, and there was healthy competition during that period. The western region, the eastern region, and other regions, they were trying to outdo each other in development, in education, and a state where the 30 states are there waiting for allocations from the federal government. And most of the states don't even invest. They don't even carry out development, things that will make their states to move forward. All that we're doing is waiting for the allocation from the federal government. That's not true federalism. That is unitary system of government. We need to tell ourselves the truth. And the truth is that there is over-concentration of power in Nigeria at the federal level. That was why the president could come up and suspend a constitutional elected governor of a state for 6 months and appointed instead a retired military officer in a constitutional framework. And you discover through that what we are operating does not reflect true federalism. Rather, it displays, unprecedented unitarism, a unitary system of government where the command structure is from the up down to the lower cadre. And of course, we know that because the Constitution says there are 3-tier system of government, each is to operate within its own area. And that is why in the Constitution, there are areas that the National Assembly could exclusively legislate. And that is the exclusive list. That those areas are no-go areas for either the state or the local governments. Those ones are meant for the federal government and federal government alone. And those areas are the areas the federal government legislates, operates, and coordinates constitutionally. There are areas that are concurrent where the states and the federal can equally, legislate upon. But in those areas where the laws made by the federal is inconsistent with that of any of the laws of the states of the federation, that of the states will be rendered null and void to the extent of inconsistency. And of course, we have the residual. And this is to show that the Constitution are taking care of a structure where each is to operate its own domain. Clear, defined parameters of operations. This is your area, operate therein and operate validly.
Is that not the characteristics of a federal system?
That is it. But that is not what we're operating here. Because in actual facts, you will discover that the issue of resource control, for example, the states don't have control over their resources. The resources are controlled and managed by the federal government. And there are other areas where the federal government appears to be playing the big brother over the state and the local governments. And of course, we know that real development starts from the grassroots, the local government. And where the local government system functions properly, they carry out their functions properly and do what they're supposed to do. There will not be upsurge in people from rural areas migrating to the cities. If there are lights, there are good roads, and there are social amenities. Maternity dispensaries and health centers in the local government for people to access for their health challenges. And then why would they rush to the cities? It's because those things are not there. And then in the bid to ensure that even the local government clearly stands. The federal government, under the current administration, admirably, took steps to ensure that there's financial autonomy to the local governments, which, came up with a suit, and the Supreme Court in that judgment clearly stated that any local government that is not democratically elected is not entitled to any allocation from the federation account. And any government, any local government that's having a caretaker committee managing it cannot benefit from the entitlements or shares from the federal allocation. Now, that judgment has been clearly delivered by the apex court, the Supreme Court. And whosoever is not satisfied with that judgment can only appeal to heaven. Because there is no other court other than the Supreme Court. But up till today, that judgment is not yet fully complied with. Why? Because in Nigeria, politicians try to use politics to distort the political landscape. And that is why, in spite of that clear, precise, erudite judgment of the Supreme Court, of course, that judgment was not the first judgment that made it clear that local governments have autonomy and the state do not have powers to collect the enforcement for the local government or to share same with the local government. But again, there is need, like we've had cause to say, that the constitution needs to be amended or abrogated entirely and a new one gotten, because they are saying in the constitution the joint account between the state and the local government councils that the money from the federal account is to be paid to. What is supposed to be done is to have accounts from the local governments 774 local government, so that their money will get to them direct.
So you believe that the current federal arrangement hinder development, democratic development?
Of course. Of course. I know it does not only that hinders development, so to say, but it has endangered our democracy. That some people are saying that democracy is in a state of coma in Nigeria, and there needs urgent need to resuscitate the life of democracy. And the indices are very clear. You discover that recently the federal government wanted to come up with a law that would make it mandatory, compulsory for people to go out and vote. Nigerians kicked against it. And why is there the voter apathy? The voter apathy is a result of what Nigerians perceive as inadequacies in the operations of our democracy. Some are questioning whether their votes even count. Some believe that the system is prone to manipulation, is prone to irregularities, and that unless and until they are sure that their votes will count, they may better stay home and rest than to come out engage in exercise in futility. What are we saying? That there is need for our democracy to be sustained, and made to thrive. People in Nigeria, with a population of over 200 million, and during the elections you're looking at say about 20 million or less. That shows you that people are disenchanted with the system. They believe that our model of democracy
is 10% of the population. That's
yes,
barely 10%.
Yes, that our model is not what they expect, and people call for the better days of yesteryears. Even as recent as 93, Nigerians took out in their large numbers during the episode of June 12. When Nigerians, in spite of the fact that the late Mko Abiola was a Muslim, his running mate was a Muslim, Nigerians came out en masse to vote for who they believe was to make Nigeria a better country. But that was never to be. And you see, Nigerians, because they believed that their wishes ought to be respected, they took to the streets. And there were protests. In the course of it, a lot of people paid with their lives. And at the end of the day, that election, which was adjudged the best, the first, the fairest, the history of this country, was annulled. Although IBB recently came up to give reasons why that election was annulled, whether the reasons have been accepted, whatever, that is not the area of our discussion today.
So what will be your suggestion in going forward? Because some people would argue that there's really nothing like true federalism. It's either you are practicing federalism or you are not. There's nothing like true or false federalism. Just like I've been coined for the case of Nigeria, which is a special case, which have been coined true or false federalism. It's either you are practicing federalism or you are practicing a unitary system of government.
Well, those people who are making those arguments are making those arguments just for the sake of, arguments. We face reality. And the reality is this, that by nomenclature, by name, Nigeria is a federal government. And a federal government smash of federal structure, the traits, the characteristics, the features of true federalism. Federalism, that's federalism both in name and in content. But then, the name goes by the word federal. But what we say does not reflect that federal structure and federal content, federal operations. And that is why those are saying they are nothing like true federalism. If a country purports to be a federal government or federal nation, but the activities of that nation is more of unitary system. That nation, though going by the name federal, is not truly federal. It is false federalism. And that's why people are calling for true federalism. It didn't start today. Experts, legal experts, noted Nigerians have been calling for true federalism because they know that, yes, in name, it is federal government, but in content, it is not. Of course, let's look at something, though not particularly opposite, but a person that was created a man by nature or by God. God created that person a man. And then the person decides to change and do transgender and say he wants to be a woman. Is that man truly a woman? The answer is no.
People argue that the person has become a woman. And that is why
that is
some of them to even participate in women's game. And
yes, and that is for purposes of argument and for those that are crusading for absolute human rights. Those that say that a man is free to do anything he likes with his life and so on. And because he's free to do whatever he likes with his life, he can decide to change to a woman, or a woman to a man. And then such arguments are there over time. Even the issue as to whether people have rights to terminate their lives. We know that there used to be a law that made suicide a criminal offense. And in 1967, when that law was buried, because if the man is already dead, who are you charging to court? So suicide is one of the offenses that is only the attempt that's the crime. The substantive offense itself is not a crime, because if the man succeeds or the woman succeeds in killing himself or herself, that's the end of the matter. So if a person decides to say, well, I don't want to remain a man, I want to become a woman, dress like a woman, act like a woman, in reality he was created a man. He decided on his own volition, against the dictates of conscience and nature, to turn himself into a woman. And if you take the physiology, there are certain characteristics that are distinct to men, the hormones and the makeup, the internal makeup of men. And if you compare that with that of the women, you see a wide difference. If you check the person's internal organs, hormones and all that, it will still reflect that of a man. And the fact that a man has decided to change to a woman does not and cannot make him a true woman.
What would you suggest going for Nigeria to return to true federalism?
Yes, what I want to suggest is that there are two options. One is to get a body to come up with a constitution that will map out clearly true federalism, giving the federal, the state, and the local government their areas of operation, and sticking to it and ensuring that our democracy is not further endangered or destroyed. That is the way to go. Our democracy needs to be sustained. Nigerians need to be made to understand that yes, that there is still hope for this nation. Nigeria is a great nation with so many vast deposits of mineral resources. But Nigerians are suffering in the midst of plenty. And we need to have a constitution that make our leaders accountable. We need to have a constitution that will make Nigerians to be proud Nigerians. In the area of rights, we need to extend our rights, the fundamental rights, to incorporate and include socio-economic rights. For example, in India, the right to life envisages a right to have a means of livelihood, to have food and shelter. If a person just have a right to life but dies of hunger, what manner of right is that? We need to go back to drawing board and come up with a constitution that will meet with the minimum requirements of true federalism and democracy in this nation. And then for Lagos State, the Lagos State government needs to go back to drawing board to do something about the LCDAs, either to scrap them out entirely as illegal or to take steps, necessary steps, to make them full-fledged local government areas. That is the way to go.
All right. This is where we draw the curtain on today's episode of Democracy on the Road of Law. Catch us same time next week as we look at small trend topics. I'm your host, Kenneth.